Hey guys, how you doing? Hope you enjoyed your 4-day weekend. Our Lady of the Snows really came through for us. I am upstairs today with the homeroom 9C and 9D gentlemen. So welcome to Fireside Chats with Mr. O'Brien. As you can see the fire going. Barbie's dream house right here. The Apple TV hooked up that of course already went off. We'll take care of that in a minute. All right, and today what we want to do is we want to take a look at the Old Testament prophets. Just take a look at eBackpack. I changed a few things on eBackpack to accommodate the snow days. So as of right now, you guys should have turned in your timeline. I'll take a look at those this week. I'll have them back to you before February break, so you can definitely begin your project, which again is due March 24th. In terms of some quizzes and some homeworks, just take a look. I did change eBackpack last night to accommodate those changes, so just to kind of work with the snow day, or the snow days I should say. In there, Friday we will have the opportunity to go to the Sacrament of Reconciliation as a religion class. Even if you are to have gym, we would go to Reconciliation as a group to kind of prepare ourselves before Lent when we return from February recess. So I want to start with the prophets today. I want to take a look at them. I want to, we made a little bit of a summary sheet just to kind of put the prophets into perspective for you. So I want to take a look at the Old Testament prophets. So if you do go into eBackpack with me for a minute, if you go into eBackpack, I have the iBook open here, but if you do go into eBackpack for a minute here. All right, let's go back here for a second. All right. In eBackpack, I'm going to go through here in the iBook, but if you do look in eBackpack, we were able to make a prophet sheet. Okay, here's the Old Testament prophet sheet. This is what we're going to primarily work off of today. So if you go into your shared classes and groups, you'll see this sheet here that has many of the Old Testament prophets. In most of the classes, we did work a little bit on Elijah, and we did work a little bit on Elisha, but we want to do really these 8 names are really the important prophets. And the way we do it, this brings us up to about 700 BC. And after 700 BC, these prophets, especially Isaiah and Micah, those will prepare really for the Messiah. So we kind of want to look at those two as the last things going forward. So let's take a look in the iBook, and what we'll do is once you have this kind of a notability, we'll take a look here at the at each of the prophets, which you can take some notes right on this sheet. So it might be kind of cool to throw this into notability, so you can take some notes right on this sheet. So let's take a look here. First, let's just review a couple things from Elijah. Okay, he preaches to the northern kingdom. Remember, Elijah and Elisha are the only two that preach to the north, which would be Israel, with its capital at Samaria. Its first king being Jeroboam, Solomon's advisor, which does not contain the bloodline to Jesus Christ. Really, all Amos as well, all right, but all the other prophets here, especially here with Jonah, Jeremiah, Isaiah, they would really preach to the south. So we would really focus on kind of a split halfway through. We have Elijah and Elisha primarily, and then Amos and Hosea also do preach to the north. Remember, that is the kingdom that does not contain the bloodline. So it's not as important for us because we're looking here at the Old Testament, the southern kingdom, the kingdom of Judah, which does contain the bloodline to Jesus Christ, which the descendants of really King David would follow through with Solomon, Rehoboam, so on and so forth. A lot of names that we don't necessarily have to know until we get to the Maccabees, and then eventually to Jesus Christ at where BC and AD kind of change over. Just again, to the sub who's in here, I am sorry that you have to listen to me. Hopefully you're able to get some work done and listen to me, so I apologize for that. So again, Elijah, 3 main miracles: the drought. Okay, remember, water known for irrigation, also known for drinking, for bathing, a huge thing here. All right, the flour and the oil for the widow, raises the widow's son from the dead, which would be similar to Jesus in the New Testament with Jairus' daughter. Okay, the raising from the dead. Defeats the false god of Baal at the contest at Mount Carmel. Remember, brought by Jezebel through Ahab, and then had the large contest at Mount Carmel. And remember, one of the things that Elijah does that really makes the prophets of Baal upset is that he is able to then pour water on this burnt offering, on this sacrifice. And now it really makes sense as to why this was such a huge issue, is because there was such a drought going on in the land. So the prophets of Baal are not happy about that. Okay? Here's God calling him from the quiet whisper. Much different than the Moses situation. Okay, as you can see here, much different from the Moses situation. The burning bush. Okay, the Samuel being called in the middle of the night. Elijah just through a quiet whisper. Okay, and many of us, I think, our call from God is going to be more of that, through a person, through a song, through a prayer, even sometimes through a trial or a tragedy that brings us closer to God. Okay, eventually he's brought up to heaven in a fiery chariot. And we may also want to add here, we do see Elijah again at the transfiguration of Jesus in the New Testament. Him and Moses are there at the transfiguration. So we do know that Elijah is up in heaven in that fiery chariot when he's brought up. But he does have a successor right after, and that would be Elisha or Elisha. That is a man, that is a dude, okay? And Elisha, what we know about is he asks for and receives a double portion of the spirit of Elijah. Let me see if I can pull back up iBooks here for a second, okay, and kind of show you a couple of the quotes here of Elisha. These are your projects, by the way, just so you guys know, that are still in my iBooks. All right, let's look at the prophet Amos first. Section 76, page 213 in the iBook. I know a few of you are right around this section, and maybe another class might be a section before, but I will, when I return, I'll catch you up into that area. All right, but we're going to take a look today at Amos, Hosea, Jonah, Jeremiah, and a little bit of the prophet Isaiah, which will really be the last thing we discuss before we get to the New Testament. Because Isaiah is the prophet that has the most prophecies of Christ that are fulfilled in detail. So it'll be kind of a great moment as we end the Old Testament and bridge to the New Testament. But the first person we want to look at is the prophet Amos. All right, and if you look at Amos, I think the one line you would probably want to see from Amos, and I think it's in the pop-up on the next page, on page 214, is he tells it as it is. He does not pull any punches. He doesn't hold anything back. He's the type of person that just tells you exactly. You ask an opinion, they're going to give you the whole opinion. The type of person that sometimes when you ask something, you're almost like, oh man, I wish I didn't ask them. All right, Amos is the type of person that really tells it as it is. And this is something that the kings are not going to like at all. This is something that the king of the north with taxation is not going to like at all. The king of the north with false gods is not going to like at all. So first let's look at Amos, and let's just kind of a couple things that we might want to jot down about Amos. All right, the first thing here is that Amos is a simple shepherd. Okay, he is a simple shepherd that God empowers to preach. Okay, he is a, and also we want to write down here, and you could write this in a note, it's just easier when I'm using explain everything. We are still in the northern kingdom, so we are still in the prophets. Remember, Elijah, Elisha or Elisha, Amos, and Hosea are really prophets of the north, so we are still not in the bloodline to Christ. That'll be something we'll talk about with the prophet Isaiah. Okay, so he is a simple shepherd that God empowers to preach. And the other thing he really focuses on, right, he focuses on the poor. Right, he really focuses on the poor. And I think the idea that he was a shepherd helps him to really focus on the poor specifically. Excuse me. His most famous quote here is in verse 6. All right, chapter 2, verse 6 in the book of Amos. And it's right here. All right. Because they hand over the just for silver and the poor for a pair of sandals. Now, if we go and we take a look at what this quote really means, remember this word silver here. All right, there's a couple references. I'm just going to give you a second to think about what you know about salvation history. All right, the idea of handing over the just for silver. All right, and again, here comes two references. Okay, the first reference is to Jesus. Judas selling Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. And the second one, which we talked about in the Old Testament, would be the story of Joseph being sold by his brothers, okay, for silver. The other thing here, it says, and the poor for a pair of sandals. You know, for me and you, living here in Nassau County of Long Island, you know, we probably have in our closet 4 or 5 pairs of flip-flops. Whether it's from Old Navy, whether it's from American Eagle, wherever it might be, we have a few pairs of flip-flops lying around. And when one gets dirty or whatever, you just throw them out. Okay, for some people in third world countries that aren't as lucky as us, okay, this could be the only shoes they wear. Father Tom has been down to the Solomon Islands. He was just down in December and January. Most of the people there are wearing bare feet all day. Okay, and if they have a pair of sandals, it's like gold to them. So what Amos is trying to say here is that for me and you, paying taxes for silver, or you know, for someone who's rich is the equivalent to the poor giving up a pair of sandals. All right, giving up a pair of sandals. So the other example I give, and I think I may have given it the first period yesterday, was, you know, we probably have basketballs, volleyballs, soccer balls, tennis balls, whatever, lying around our garage deflated. I've seen videos of some of the soldiers. One of the guys I went to high school with was telling me a story. He went into active service after high school. He brought over basketballs to Afghanistan. And he said, you would have thought it was Christmas morning. Basketballs that people here didn't really want or didn't need anymore because they were, you know, faded, or the grips weren't as good, or whatever it would be. And he said, you would have thought it was Christmas morning over there. Just kids not having much, getting these basketballs and really cherishing that. So for us, some of these things that we are lucky, all right, many of us have either lost our cell phone or cracked our screen on our cell phone, and it kind of feels like, what am I going to do without this? That's how some of these people back then, if they only own one pair of shoes or they only own one basketball, it would be that same feeling you have when you crack the screen, or something to that effect. So we want to move forward with Isaiah, looking at a couple references. Okay, if you look here at the commentary, it's very interesting to see here that that Amos was originally a shepherd of Judah, right, of the southern kingdom, who was called by God to go to the north. So opposite. So he was very, very negative against the kings of the northern kingdom, because they had things that were out of control, luxurious, okay, out of control. And here's another line here where it says, the rich were becoming too busy becoming richer, while the poor were becoming more oppressed. One of the things that really brings down Israel, there's really a few things. You have the worship of the gods of Baal. You have adultery, okay, or people just intermarrying. You have oppression of the poor. You have not caring for the poor. Okay, the deterioration of faith, all these things kind of grew together. So Amos is from the south, preaching to the north. That's very important to look at. And Amos here, he really starts to talk here a little bit about salvation history. Okay, he's raising up the prophets, the Nazarite. Okay, so the people keep groaning against him. Now, as I said, Amos is a simple shepherd, which is going to be very opposite of the next person, who is going to be the prophet Hosea. The prophet Hosea is someone who is almost completely opposite of Amos. And as we look here, okay, the idea here that unlike Amos, Hosea is from the northern kingdom. Okay, so he's going to preach to his own people. So sometimes it's more difficult. Uh, I give the example. I would say the example would be if an acquaintance comes to you and asks you an opinion. It's much easier to give you sometimes an opinion to an acquaintance than if a best friend asks you, you know, am I being nice to that person or whatever it might be. It's a little bit more difficult to say something negative to one of your friends. So I think it's a little bit more difficult for Hosea to preach rather than Amos because he's not prophesying to his own people. All right, and the image God uses for Hosea, all right, is the image of a prostitute. Okay, and what God is going to ask Hosea to do as the prophet, which is almost unthinkable, is he is going to ask him to marry this prostitute by the name of Gomer. Again, one of these fantastic biblical names. Okay, and Gomer was a prostitute. So Hosea is marrying a prostitute. Okay, and she is going to conceive him 3 sons. If you look here, you have Jezreel, you have the second one, which is named Not Pitied, and the third one, which is named Not My People. Now, you might not be thinking about this, but it's pretty hilarious that names which are so important in the Old Testament, as we talked about Abram becoming Abraham, Jacob becoming Israel, Sarai becoming Sarah, okay, that the 3 names God chooses are the names Jezreel, which is going to be the king, all right, in the valley of Jezreel. Here you go, all right, in the area, place. The second name is going to be Not Pitied, all right, because he's saying right now Israel keeps breaking away. God is not going to feel pity for them. Okay, I will only save you by the Lord, as he says. All right, and the last one is the Lord said, Not my people. Because right now you're not acting like my people. Okay, right now you're not acting like my people. Now it's all going to be in the image of a prostitute. So imagine this. God is telling Hosea to remain faithful to this woman he's marrying, who's a prostitute, who he knows is going to cheat. God is saying the same thing about the people. I know that they are going to sin against me, but I am going to keep my promise of salvation history. I am going to continuously love these people. Okay, that's what God is trying to say. All right, let's continue with Hosea. All right, just looking at Hosea here for the commentary. Okay, God does say right here, okay, that Israel is going to be punished. Okay, Israel is going to be punished. All right, but they will be accepted back after they repent. So this idea again of this spouse, which we haven't really seen, which is unrivaled, really. All right. Remember, at this time, men were allowed to have multiple wives, but women could not have multiple husbands. A huge difference, okay, in society. So for the man to stay with the unfaithful wife was totally against what society said. And then if you just look over here, this is something you don't have to memorize. But if you scroll down on your scrolling sidebar here, you really see the 12 minor prophets. I think I've told you this before. I took a class in college on the prophets. If you find this class interesting and you ever want to do some reading, to read through some of the prophetical books are very, very interesting. And again, these are some names that you probably, even if you're a very good Catholic, all right, you probably wouldn't really have heard many of these names going forward. So we're only going to pick some of what I like to call the highlights of the prophets, all right? And we could spend probably an entire year on the prophets, but we're just going to look at some of the highlights of some of the prophets and why they're important, especially knowing salvation history and all the foreshadowings and types that we have been working on. All right, this brings us to Jonah. A lot of people have heard this story numerous times. All right, partly because of the giant fish or the whale that's in the story of Jonah, and it is pretty cool because there is foreshadowings to Christ here in this story. So I definitely want to read through this one a little bit, spend a little bit more time on Jonah, because I think it's very interesting to look at, and just the humor that God uses in it. I mean, if we just look here and read through this for a second, the satire in the Bible. All right. Is it fact or fiction as a satire? Just think about the comedy that's put forward. So let's read through this. Jonah is called by God and immediately takes off in the opposite direction. Then God tries to get his attention with a storm, but it's the non-Jewish sailors who get the point about God, whereas the prophet that God called doesn't get it. All right, just as you are beginning to wonder how God is going to get Jonah to Nineveh, right, which is the Assyrian capital. So this story is different, and I'll write this down in a second, because God, all right, or let's actually take a look at right now. God is sending him to Nineveh, okay, which is in Assyria. So what this one is telling us here, I think the best way to think about it is that God, okay, God in this story cares about all people, not just the Jews. So this story shows that God is going to care about other people. So I think that's one thing that the story of Jonah would talk about. Okay, then when Jonah reaches Israel's back over here, when Jonah reaches Israel's mortal enemies, the people of Nineveh immediately repent. And if you read Jonah 3:8 carefully, including the animals, all right, then Jonah becomes upset that the people converted and were not punished. He begins to get upset and his favorite tree dies. I mean, this is complete comedy here. God responds, if Jonah is so concerned about the tree, why shouldn't God be concerned with the city of Nineveh with thousands of people? So although many people at the time were saying that the people of the northern kingdom were so bad, God says, I'm still going to care about everyone. Okay, so let's take a look here at the story, and we'll just read through some parts because I think you'll find it interesting. All right, so let's take a look here. All right, at chapter 1. So the word of the Lord came to Jonah. He set out for the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, for their wickedness has come before me. But Jonah, as we said earlier, made ready to flee to Tarshish away from the Lord. He went down to Joppa, found a ship going to Tarshish, paid the fare, and went down into it to go with them to Tarshish away from the Lord. So he's running away from the Lord, which, I mean, listen, we all say we're ready for God's call, but if he calls us today, are we ready? What do we need to take with us? Who do we need to tell? The Lord then, however, hurled a great wind upon the sea, and the storm was so great the ship was about to break up. Then the sailors were afraid, and each one of them cried to their God. To lighten the ship, they threw the cargo in the sea. So they weren't holding on to any baggage. They got rid of all of it. Meanwhile, Jonah had gone into the hold of the ship and lay there fast asleep. The captain approached him and said, what are you doing asleep? Get up, call on your God. Perhaps this God will be mindful of us so that we will not perish. Then they said to one another, come, let us cast lots to discover on whose account this evil has come to us. So they're playing cards or they're rolling dice, and the lot fell upon Jonah. Then they said to him, tell us why this evil has come to us. What is your business? Where do you come from? What is your country, and to what people do you belong? Jonah says, right here, he says, I'm a Hebrew. He says here, I'm a Hebrew. Okay, I fear the Lord who made sea. I fear the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land. Now the men were seized with great fear and said to him, "How do you know such a thing?" They knew he was fleeing from God because he told them. They asked, "What shall we do with you?" All right, let's move over to the next page. The sea may calm down for us, for the sea was growing more and more stormy. Jonah responded, "Pick me up and hurl me into the sea, and the sea will calm down for you. For I know this great storm has come because of me." So now he's almost believing what the people say. Still the men rowed hard to return to dry land, but they could not, for the sea grew more and more stormy. Then they cried to the Lord, "Please, O Lord, do not let us perish for taking this man's life. Do not charge us with shedding innocent blood. For you, Lord, have accomplished what you desired." Then they picked up Jonah and hurled him into the sea, and the sea stopped raging. Seized with great fear of the Lord, the men offered sacrifices to the Lord and made vows. So right here, the men are converted by the presence of Jonah in the sea. Okay, now remember, he still hasn't went to Assyria. He still hasn't went to Nineveh, which was his number one mission. All right, let's take a look here at chapter 2. Okay, let's take a look there for a minute at chapter 2. Right here. Okay. But the Lord sent a great fish. Now we always say a whale. Okay, we always put a whale in the picture. So whichever one, it doesn't really matter whether it's a whale or a giant fish. Obviously, that would make things much different. Okay, but whatever you want to say, either one would be right on a test. All right, I wouldn't put both choices. All right, and he remained in the belly of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. Now Jonah, all right, is in the fish. Now this 3 and 3. All right, now it's interesting if you think about it, sort of to this effect. Okay, maybe we'll make a note here. Okay, inside the whale's belly or fish, let's call it the whale's belly. Okay, inside the whale's belly is darkness. That darkness is for 3 days. What we see here is if we think of that word 3 again, remember 3, if we see that 3 again, we also can look at the idea that the world is in darkness for 3 days before Jesus resurrects. So the image here of Jonah, okay, is 100% a foreshadowing of Christ. And that's why Jonah, to me, is a very important character. All right, it's very clear here that the idea of the darkness in the whale's belly, even whether this story happened or it didn't, and obviously it sounds very unbelievable. So the idea of a satire in the Bible, that the author of this story, all right, Jonah was probably a real person, but maybe all these things didn't happen. The author of this story, the ultimate author being God, is sending us this idea so that we know that Jesus is, for those 3 days in the tomb, is idea that he is going to bring the light of the world back. He is the light of the world. All right, similar to what Jonah is doing in this story. So let's move ahead here after, and this is Jonah's prayer. Okay, we'll kind of skip over Jonah's prayer a little bit and move along a little. All right, so here Jonah continues, "My prayer came to you in your holy temple. All right, those who worship worthless idols abandon their hope of mercy, but I, with thankful voice, will sacrifice to you. What I have vowed I will pay. Deliverance is in the Lord." And then look at the imagery. Thanks for being so blunt here. All right, then the Lord commanded the fish to vomit Jonah upon dry land. All right, so the fish now vomits, spits out Jonah on the dry land at Nineveh. And then we see some biblical numbers here. Okay, we see, all right, Nineveh, the world comes to Jonah a second time. All right, and then here we see Jonah journeys through the city. All right, where does it say? Oh, here it is. Took 3 days to walk through it. Okay, 40 days more. So we see these biblical numbers that we've discussed many times. Okay, and then God, what He ends up doing here is sparing the city. So sparing the people of Nineveh, who are the most powerful. The Assyrians are the most powerful at this point. And that's really the story of Jonah. I mean, the important thing here is the prophet, the idea that God is not just going to talk to only the Jews. Obviously, there's some humor in this. I think earlier in the year I told you the joke about Jonah and the young girl in the first grade class. If I didn't, just remind me. I'd be happy to do that tomorrow for you guys. All right, but we can't run from the will of God. All right, we sing the song or we hear the song Jesus Take the Wheel. Do we really mean that? Do we want Jesus to take the wheel of our life? Do we want to just kind of completely not worry about ourselves and to put God being first in our lives and just let Him take over regardless of what it is? I think that's a kind of a song that is probably a song that Jonah would hear. All right, is he ready to run? He's ready to run from the will of God? He doesn't know how much He trusts Him. All right, until a whale swallows him or a fish swallows him and spits him out, and then he learns his lesson the hard way. Okay, let's move ahead to section 79 with the prophet Jeremiah. There's one quote in here that I think probably all of you have heard in the pro-life movement. Okay, and that's before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. The idea that before, regardless of what our state or what our government says, that God knew of you from the beginning of time. He knew that you were going to be brought into the world. He had a plan for you. You know, from the moment of conception, that is a life. And that is the idea that Jeremiah preaches way back thousands, 3,000 years ago, all right, roughly. And it says here, Jeremiah is someone who talks the talk and walks the walk. Many times we hear people that just keep talking. They can't follow, they can't carry out the words that they promise. Jeremiah can do both. Okay? Now, one of the things that we discussed with Moses, and we'll see in the next section with Isaiah, is the idea, and even with Samuel, is the idea of a biblical call. Okay, and if we kind of open up that Catholic Faith Facts, I'm just going to kind of write it out, but if you look up your Catholic Faith Facts there are 4 parts of a biblical call, if you remember them. So I'm just going to kind of put them up here at the beginning, at the, top of the screen. Okay, so the idea of a biblical call. Okay, remember, number 1 would be an appearance. Okay, an appearance of whatever it might be. All right, Moses was the burning bush. We're going to see what Jeremiah's is here. Okay, 2 would be that God appoints a mission for the person. Okay, 3 would be the person feels unworthy or denial. Okay, unworthy or denial of their idea. If you remember with of the mission, if you remember with Moses, he was not a good speaker. If you remember Samuel, he kept saying, is this really God talking to me? He kept going to Eli. And then the 4th is God is going to reassure the person. I think Moses is probably the easiest because he gives him Aaron. So the idea here of the biblical call. So that's kind of just a reminder. And we're going to see how God is going to do it. With the call of Jeremiah. So maybe we'll number where we see them here. All right, if you look here, number 1, it just says the word of the Lord came to me. So I think it would be easy here. It's just the voice of God. All right, whether it's a theophany or whether God's seeing him, I think that's pretty easy. So that's where the biblical call would be there. And then God says, and then maybe it's a little out of order here, but here's the number 3. Okay, oh, here it is. All right, I have already appointed you a prophet. So this is kind of like 2 here, and we'll kind of add to 2 a little bit more. 3, here he says, I don't know how to speak. I'm too young. I am too young to do this. I can't do this right now. All right, I'm not ready for this. Okay, so here is him already denying being worthy. We're going to move to the next page and we'll see how this continues. Okay, and then here's kind of a continuation of number 2 here. Or, do not be afraid. You're going to be Here, do not be afraid here. You're going to be a prophet. Okay, so 2 is the idea of the prophet. Okay, the preaching. And then here it is, the reassurance here on verse 9. Okay, see, I place my words in your mouth. He touches his mouth. Here's 4. Here's his reassurance. Here's something physical. It's almost at confession. Okay, we can pray to God for forgiveness, but when do we know we're truly forgiven? When the priest takes his hand and blesses us and says, I absolve you in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. That's when you truly know you're forgiven. That's why that sacrament is beautiful, with the amazing grace. All right, and then Jeremiah really talks, one of one of the things that I kind of didn't mention when we started. This is where we start the southern kingdom of Judah. So he is preaching to the people that's descendants will become the Messiah. Okay, that will become Jesus at that time. All right, and he does talk about how the city of Jerusalem will be destroyed, okay, which is going to happen by the Babylonians, and then will be rebuilt by King Herod at the time of Christ. So Jeremiah is kind of like a doom and gloom type prophet, but it is important to know his biblical call and how he kind of fits into that idea of a biblical call. All right.